Hi, welcome to another installment of No Smoke, Just Vapor. As most of you know by now, we have been tracking the tobacco control bill. A lot has happened over the past couple of weeks, and we are joined again today by Mr. Kurt Yao of Vaping Saved My Life, as well as Mr. Calvin Matlou, a political analyst from Frontline Africa Consulting. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asanda.
We spoke at length the last time. The bill was with Parliament. We hadn't started public hearings. We spoke about what to expect from a legislative process. Can you just, Kelvin, let me start with you. Can you just tell us where we are right now and what has transpired since the last conversation that we've had?
Thank you, Asanda. Well, the last time we spoke, the bill was just introduced in Parliament. Now, the Portfolio Committee on Health has started with public hearings in all 9 provinces. So far, we have done 4 provinces. We have done the Northwest, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and the Free State. And the purpose of the public hearings is to elicit the views of the people that will be affected by these policies and ensure that they're part of the policy-making process and ensuring that this bill reflects their views and their wishes.
From a consumer point of view, Kurt, I mean, I know a lot of South Africans, ordinary South Africans, do not necessarily know the legislative process. I mean, has there been enough communication of the next steps in terms of what Parliament was doing, and how have consumers gotten involved?
To be absolutely blunt, Asanda, no. There hasn't been proper communication, and thereby not providing adequate input or providing a platform for adequate input of normal consumers or stakeholders in this process. It's something that was warned early on from the start, is that we need, for example, a 5-week almost announcing that these hearings are going to happen within a 5-week period, workshops, communicating what the contents of the bill is. So I don't believe we've seen the stakeholders that are affected by this bill attending these hearings because there's very little information that's been shared around these hearings.
It's an important point that you raised, because the last time when we spoke about this topic, the issue of the Mohale judgment was still fresh, where there were damning findings against Parliament in terms of the process that they were following or had not followed in terms of passing certain laws. And a lot hinged on the stakeholder engagement component. You mentioned the 5-week notice that ought to be given to stakeholders. And if I understand correctly, there are parliamentary guidelines as well that in a way guide policymakers on what they need to be doing. So from your own experiences, Calvin, you've attended all the public hearings, I assume. Have there been adequate consultation prior to those hearings taking place? And you can just paint a picture for us on what communication went out.
Unfortunately not. So we have a public participation guideline for the legislative sector, which states that before commencing with the hearings, you need to give 5 weeks notice to the affected area. And weeks, at least 7 days before, you need to conduct pre-hearings. So that is going out to the people and telling them what the bill is about, how it's going to affect them, what is the purpose of that bill. So you need to do all those things so that you ensure what we said last time was meaningful participation. So that when people come and make contributions, they make contributions on something they are well-versed about, something they know about, so that you don't come there and talk about something that you don't know, which we have seen with these public hearings, unfortunately, because those things were not done. Where you had pre-hearings, they were done a couple of days before, and the people in those rooms were not the right kind of people, the community members that are supposed to go there and make those contributions. So that has been some of the issues that have come up with the way the committee has been conducting these hearings, which unfortunately it's not within the spirit of that judgment. And unfortunately, I'm seeing some issues for Parliament if this does go to court.
From a vapor's point of view, Kurt, I mean, we know that South Africa doesn't have a large number of vapors that you find in each community, you know. So if you take, for example, a province like Mpumalanga, you know, where the number of vapors is not that much and saturated more in the metropolitan areas than in the outskirts, how have vapors been reached out to? If they have, you know, or what ought to have been done to get to those vapors to ensure that their voices were heard at these hearings?
So what we kind of do is we probably post whenever we get knowledge of these hearings, which is, as Calvin's indicated, rather shoddily, sometimes even a day or even the night before that there is a confirmed hearing in these locations. So what we try to do is using our social medias as well as WhatsApp groups at trying to advise consumers in that area that there is a hearing. Unfortunately, you know, their lives can't be, adjusted or mended to meet those hearings. So the time is very, very critical. And if we take, for example, let's say there are small vape shops in those areas, small owner-operator vape shops in the areas. Their busiest times are typically over the weekends, a Saturday or a Sunday or a Friday afternoon. They need to have time to prep to have those shops either closed or manned by somebody else so they can attend those hearings. But they're not given those opportunities. And because they are not informed about what these hearings, they can't even express it to their customers that there is a hearing going to happen. Because I'm sure customers that are attending those shops or frequent those shops would be interested to know that there is a hearing and would be interested to participate in this process. But because there is no communication, and that communication doesn't filter across all the requirements, as per what the Makhale case has indicated and the guidelines have indicated, no one gets to know about these hearings. However, the hearings are well attended, but they're not attended by true stakeholders in this discussion.
I mean, you speak about the timing, say, or happening over a weekend. And I recall when the portfolio committee chair first announced the hearings, I think the first province was Northwest. And a key consideration, he said, of doing it over 3 days, starting on Friday, was to ensure that there would be meaningful participation. There would be a large number of people who attend these hearings because it's a weekend. And what you've just said, Kurt, to me is indicative of the lack of intimate knowledge that these guys have about the vaping industry. Because if they knew, if they had conducted a proper socioeconomic impact assessment, if they understand the demographics of this industry, they would understand that a weekend, for example, is an important time for small businesses. That's where they make most of their money, you know. So surely, when you look at what has happened, one can't help but think that they haven't done their homework. Yes, they're dealing with a bill, but they haven't done their homework. Is that a correct assumption to make?
I think that's a spot on, but it's also an illogical assumption. If we, let's say, for example, take a wedding, and you plan a wedding, and you know a wedding's going to occur on a certain day, but you only send the invitations the night before. What kind of guests are you going to have at that wedding? You know, these are the things this is an illogical process. If you're really committed to understanding what people are wanting or want to express around this bill, you need to give them an opportunity to, first of all, understand the bill, formulate their response as to what the clauses are in the bill, and then give them sufficient amount of time to work to that particular date. So as, for example, in the case of a small shop, they would need to either make a decision they're going to close for that day to participate in the hearing, or find somebody that could man the shop whilst they go have their say. But if you're only going to be announcing this the night before or even the day before, it leaves very little time to maneuver. And in fact, this has now become almost creating a culture of apathy amongst the vapors, is that we know they don't want to hear from us. So therefore, we shouldn't be speaking.
I mean, when we talk about the period leading up to the actual public hearings, I mean, we know there's a lot of things that have not gone right. let's now go to the actual hearings. So you hear about the hearings. I'm a concerned stakeholder. I want to attend. I drive all the way to Limpopo to attend the hearings because I've told myself I'm going to speak up. I'm going to speak up for the vaping industry. I'm going to speak up for my rights. What happens at a public hearing? Calvin, tell us. Just
Sure.
paint a picture for us.
Before I go to that, just to add on what Kurt was saying, I think Parliament has become sort of myopic and inflexible. They are conducting their business in a hybrid form. So why can't they do the hearings in hybrid form, virtually and physically? Because even the venues that they pick, they can't accommodate most members of the community. So it's only a few numbers. So if you want people to participate, make sure that they have access to all the means they at their disposal to make sure that they can attend. So for those who cannot attend, make sure that there are platforms. Parliament does have those facilities. Going to your question, it's been an interesting.
So I hear an interesting experience. To be part of
yes,
those,
for
yes.
sure. I think it makes a mockery of the whole thing about public participation, because you don't get to hear broader views, because you have people who are making the same inputs over and over in different venues. So what does it say about the diversity of views if you have the same people making the same points, and those are the points that Parliament is going to take and say the people are either for or against this bill, but if it's the same people. So that is one of the pitfalls of how these hearings have been conducted. And secondly, if you invite, let's say 200 people, and you're only going to let maybe 50 people speak, why did you invite 250
But what's the
people?
selection criteria?
Exactly.
How do you get
Yeah,
to
those sort of
choose
things.
this one
Yes.
speaks, that one can't speak? So how has it happened during these hearings?
Well, it's at the
Random.
yes, at the discretion of the chairperson. Even other members of the committee, they don't get to choose. I don't know how much influence they have into who gets picked to speak, but most of the time it's at the discretion of the chairperson. And most of the time people are left feeling despondent and some not happy. Like you said, you drive all the way to spending your weekend when you could have been doing something else, and then going to this hearing because you want to make your voice heard, and you get there and you're not picked. So to you it says, but what kind of a democracy is this where I don't get to get my voice heard? Whereas I've been called to come and make my voice heard, but I'm not given that opportunity. So those are some of the pitfalls of the way the committee has been conducting these hearings. Yeah.
And I mean, Kurt, we've spoken earlier. You've had your own personal experiences. I mean, you are a voice that represents the consumers in South Africa. So a very important voice that needs to be heard, because what you have to say is for the consumers. Have you had an opportunity to speak at these hearings? If not, why not?
I think the only enjoyable experience around this was the actual trip there to see the countryside. But when I got there, it's incredibly frustrating, incredibly disappointing, because on both the public hearings that I've managed to attend, I was, the only way I can put it is turned down on at least 6 occasions, because the showing of hands, which I understand is for controlling the process, but if your hand never gets picked for at least 6 times, 6 occasions, you kind of realize that maybe this is not something that is free and fair. And especially if you look at other individuals that have spoken repeatedly at various different hearings, because I watched all the hearings on Parliament TV, and you'll notice the same individuals getting selected and having the same points, raising the same points. However, we don't see, even myself, and I'm not a difficult person to pick out from the crowd, not given that opportunity. And I think what I've noticed, and it might be cynical of me, is that it's almost like we need to achieve a certain number and then the hearing is closed, even with hands still left up in the air. And as part of my, what I find that offensive, because I believe that a democracy and freedom is not about your once every 4 years to vote. It's about participating in a process. And by just selecting hands and making sure only X amount of hands are selected during that process and leaving the other hands up in the air is not a democratic process, because there might be valuable input in there. So we've seen hearings that I've witnessed that are even cut short by an hour and a half. So not even the full time is allotted. So you're going to ask yourself this fundamental question: what is the credibility and the legitimacy of these hearings if this is the process that's been followed?
It's heartbreaking, because I mean, I've attended almost all the hearings, and with all of them, it's the same kind of issue. So I really do understand, and I think to pick on the issue where the same individuals get to speak, we understand that this is a polarizing bill. We all know, and we know what the Department of Health's posture is towards vaping, towards smoking. But for me, what is troubling is you have NGOs that are busing individuals across the country, young people, who are disseminating misinformation, at these hearings, but they get picked. Every hearing they get picked, I mean, and you speak that this is not democracy. Calvin, what's happening? How can they use those voices to say this is the will of the people when you have the same individual speaking at all 5 provinces, the same thing over and over again?
It's malicious compliance.
Malicious compliance.
Yeah. So going back to how this bill came about, it was the same issues again. You're supposed to consult stakeholders that would be affected by a bill that you want to propose. But what we saw from the beginning, because I've been part of this journey from 2018, is that the Department of Health set its mind on coming up with a bill, and nothing was going to stop them, regardless of who said what. And if you come with a different view, well, you are ignored, simply. And this is the same thing that's happening again. The same individuals that get to reinforce these certain messages are the messages that largely go with what the Department of Health seeks to do. So you ask yourself the question, is the objective to really decrease smoking rates, or is there another agenda? And who controls that agenda? Because if it was a public health objective that they wanted to fulfill, surely you'd bring everyone on board, making sure that everyone is involved. For instance, the issue of education and awareness, something that's not been done. Most people tend to conflate a number of issues, smoking and vaping, for instance, because they don't know. They just see the same things, vaping and smoking of hubbly bubblies. To them, it's the same thing, because there isn't that education that's happening. And who better to do that education than government, the Department of Health? They've done it successfully with HIV and AIDS campaigns. We all know about the ABCs now, because it's something that has been drilled over and over. It's messages that have been reinforced over and over. But they're not doing it here, which you ask yourself, what is the objective here?
That's a very interesting point. And I mean, if we had all the time in the world, Kurt, in a perfect world, if our democracy was working, the legislative process was indeed for the people, by the people, what are some of the things that you think need to happen differently going forward with these public hearings? Let's hope the portfolio committee is watching, What would you tell them that they need to change going forward?
It's quite simple. Kick the ball back. The bill is it's an end game bill. It's designed and architected for a country that's in a very different position. There are a number of issues that are causing significant more harm to smoking rates and to into the public health. One of those is one that we've been living with for the last decade, and that is the illicit cigarette trade. That needs to be squashed first before we even consider looking at other bills. I'm not saying that regulation should not be applied to vaping products. That is essential. But the problem is this particular bill is aimed at an end game strategy when we haven't even approached things like cessation in our public spaces, the control of illicit cigarettes, the education of cigarette or of smoking in the country, even the monitoring of consumption is lackluster or haphazard because we don't see consistency around that. This bill needs to be kicked back and some kind of amendment that creates a foundation for vaping regulations. Paramount is access to the youth. Paramount is licensing of these products. But as it is now, there's nothing that these public hearings can do to actually solve the intent, and that is to improve public health.
Mr. Matlou, 10
Yes, ma'am.
seconds.
Yeah.
We're out of time. What advice would you give to the chair of the portfolio committee going forward?
As Mr. Kurt said, stop where you are with the public hearings, go back and do proper consultation and bring the Department of Health and ask the questions that have been coming up to say, how did you miss this? What's your response before we even continue with the rest of the provinces? How do you respond to what has been raised so far? And if you're not getting the proper adequate responses, then push it back to the department to do the work before it comes to the committee again.
Push back it is.
Yeah.
That's all the time we've had today to talk about this very important and yet polarizing bill. As you would have heard from our guest today, there is so much that has gone wrong in this public participation process in regulating vaping products in particular. So the advice to those that can make the decision is it's perhaps a time to stop, look and see what can be done differently. And perhaps you could start by doing more research to understand the vaping industry. Thank you for watching.